So, Honorable Speaker, dear esteemed colleagues, and my dear friends, I welcome all of you on behalf of amidst School of Liberal Arts. This is our third webinar in this academic session. As you know, we are gathered here to listen Ambassador A.K. Singh on India-US relations amidst global multipolarity. The trajectory of relationship between India and US have been very, very interesting. The US President Richard Nixon and his National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger ill-treated then Indian Prime Minister and had a very poor opinion about India. But this situation changed subsequently. It drastically changed when Rajiv Gandhi became Indian Prime Minister and Ronald Reagan US President. Many factors played an important role in shaping of this changed relationship. India played a very significant role in geopolitics of this world. Indian diaspora has remarkable contribution in this context. When President Reagan hosted a dinner in honor of our Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, he said, I quote, "Your most precious gift to us has been the many Indians who have been proud citizens of our country. They embody the human bond that is between us." But then things changed. When we did our nuclear test during Atal Bihari Vajpayee Prime Ministership, US government imposed many types of sanctions headed by US President Bill Clinton. But very soon, our diaspora, which we also call as soft power, prevailed upon him, and gradually those sanctions were lifted. Indian American Foundation was established, and very soon US President Clinton visited New Delhi and stayed in India for almost a week. Successive governments at both the sides took the relationship forward. Economic liberalization in India also played one important role in shaping of this relationship. During Manmohan Singh's premiership in India and George Bush as US President in USA, signed Indo-US Nuclear Treaty. This relationship has been taken forward by all the successive governments. Then we had Quad and many diplomatic experts, foreign policy experts, call our relationship as natural allies. And this you have seen recently in G20 summit also. This is a very brief sketch of relationship. But to know more about this relationship, we had very eminent speaker with us, who has been at the helms of affairs in this shaping of the relationship and who played a very important role in India-US relationship, Ambassador A.K. Singh. Arun Kumar Singh, popularly known as Arun Singh, is a former Indian diplomat. He was the Indian ambassador to the United States. Prior to joining Indian Foreign Service, he did his post-graduation in economics from Delhi School of Economics and also taught for a few years in Delhi University. Before becoming Indian ambassador to the United States, he was Indian ambassador to many countries, including France, Israel, Moscow, and other places. He also has served as Joint Secretary to the Ministry of External Affairs. Ambassador Singh also served as counselor at the Permanent Mission for India to the United Nations, New York, where he handled multilateral social and economic negotiations. He was the lead coordinator for India at the World Summit for Social Development in Copenhagen. Currently, he is a senior fellow with the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund for the United States. He is also a senior counselor at the Cohen Group, a consulting firm in Washington, D.C. He is one of the finest diplomats we have today in our country. We are privileged and honored to have you amongst us. Without further any ado, we would like to request you to enlighten us on this interesting and fascinating topic. Thank you so much, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abhay Kumar. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion and for this opportunity. I now, after retirement, teach at a university in Delhi, and I like to keep my sessions interactive. Unfortunately, that is not possible in a virtual format, but I do hope that through my comments, we will be able to stimulate some controversy, some thinking, and I look forward to questions. I'll speak for about 35, 40 minutes, and then if there are any questions, of course, happy to handle after that. I understand that the students are from different disciplines at the university, and not many of them would have been exposed to international relations. So let me just say one thing, which is something that I start my class or session at the university here also, that whether you like it or not, whether you are aware of it or not, international relations will impact on you. They impact on all of us, on our daily lives, on our opportunities. If you just look at trade, when President Trump of the US decided to take tariff measures against China, he also imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from India. So that impacted production and exports from India. But more than that, he went ahead and removed the GSP, Generalized Scheme of Preferences benefits that were available to India, under which duty-free goods from many labor-intensive sectors in the US, almost $6 billion worth, labor-intensive sectors in India were being exported to the US. Gems and jewelry, leather, textiles. And these exports from India were impacting on job creation within India. So there are these impacts that are happening. Now, and if you again look at the situation today, you must be reading that the United States is today ready to give higher level technology access to India. For instance, they have recently authorized the transfer to India of GE jet engine technology. Now, India doesn't have technology for jet engines. We tried to get this technology from the US in 2013-14, but the United States blocked that transfer, saying that it is very sensitive technology. They don't want to share it with any other country. Today, the US, both the administration and US Congress, have authorized that transfer. And the US is saying that they are now giving higher levels of technology transfer to India in jet engine technology than they have done to any other country. Now, why is the US doing it? The US is doing it because today it feels that India is an important partner for the US, aside from other opportunities that I'll talk to you about, but also because in the challenge they are facing from China, they see India as a valuable partner. And because of that international security strategic dimension, the opportunity they are opening up for India, we will be able to get technology, we will be able to do production, there will be spin-off effects. So there are impacts on the overall economy, there are impacts on specific sectors of the economy as a result of developments in international relations. So when you are handling a job that you're doing, wherever, if you are aware of international trends, if you're also monitoring international trends, you will be one step ahead of your competitors who don't have the same insight on international trends. So just keep that aspect in mind, because, or if you look at interest rates, suddenly the US Federal Reserve raises the interest rate and money flows out from the Indian stock market to go and invest in the United States. Then the stock prices come down in India. And there is an impact on funds availability in India, which will impact on production in different sectors. So just keep these linkages in mind and in whatever strategies you make in jobs that you may be doing. So that's something that I want to flag for you. So my recommendation to you would be that on a daily basis, read some aspect related to international relations, see where things are headed. How do they relate to what you are experiencing in your day-to-day life, and what do they relate to the particular subjects that you're doing in day-to-day life, be it economics, be it pol science, or any other area. So with that having been said, in today's context, the major global contestation that is taking place is between United States Russia, and China. They are the leading global powers. Now, the others, India, Japan, Europe, they are trying to work their strategies around this major contestation so that they can maximize the advantage to themselves. At the moment, from about 1980 till recently, the US and China had a working relationship, and China was not as supportive of Russia as it has now become. And till about 2014, US didn't have a very difficult relationship with Russia. Since then, the relationship with Russia has become more complicated. As a result, Russia and China have come together. Now, that creates a challenge for India because we have a very strong relationship with Russia. Even now, although we are diversifying, we are buying more and more defense supplies from Israel, from France, from the US. Even now, 60% of our defense inventory is of Russian origin. Therefore, for maintaining the security at our frontiers, the relationship with Russia is very, very critical. And the challenge is that today, because the difficulties that Russia has with the West, Russia is becoming more and more dependent in China. And one effort for India is to ensure that on India-China issues, Russia does not go over to the side of China. But going ahead, will that be sustained? And that becomes a question mark, as there's a deeper linkage between Russia and China, and that's something that our leadership will have to constantly monitor and assess. So when I look at this major global contestation between US, Russia, and China, if you just see the statements coming out from our leaders, the Prime Minister, the External Affairs Minister, clearly the message is that at this moment, we are trying to deepen the engagement with the United States, sustain the relationship with Russia, and strengthen ourselves economically, technologically, in defense terms, to deal with the challenge from China. And that's India's broad strategies. Now, in the framework of this strategy, since the subject of our discussion is India-US relationship, where does the India-US relationship fit in? Now, although the Russia relationship is very important, as I described for you, still the strongest defense partner. We have an important energy partnership. India has invested, the Overseas Videsh Limited has invested more than $10 billion in Sakhalin project for oil and gas, which has worked very well for us as part of our energy security. Russian oil and gas companies have also invested in India. So aside from defense, energy is an important partnership. But if you look at India's comprehensive national interests, so when we talk of comprehensive national interests, we look not just at defense and security, but we look at the economic aspect, trade, investments, technology cooperation, and of course, defense. So when we look at the comprehensive national interest, the strongest partner for India today is the United States. If you look at trade, US is our leading trading partner. India-US trade today stands at $191 billion. It has increased 14 times in the last 23 years and doubled in the last 8 years. And what is even more important is that we have a trade surplus with the United States, both in goods and in services, when we are an overall trade deficit country. So it's an important partnership for India in that aspect. Now, if you go to investments, the largest foreign investor in India is the United States, US companies. They have invested more than $50 billion in the US economy, in the Indian economy by now. But what is interesting is not just that the US is a major investor in India, but Indian companies have invested more than $40 billion in the US. And they have presence across all 50 US states. They have invested in IT, in the auto component sector, in pharmaceuticals, and many other areas. And they have invested in the US, partly to get access to technology, because when you're part of that production ecosystem, you get access to technology, partly to get access to the market. So not only is the US a major investor in India, But for Indian companies, the US market, investment in the US market is among the largest presence that Indian companies have anywhere outside India for technology and market access. Going beyond that, if you look at the presence of the Indian origin diaspora, it is estimated today that there are more than 4.5 million people of Indian origin in the United States. It is the largest single country presence of Indian origin diaspora anywhere in the world. We have about 3 million people in the UAE, 3 million in Saudi Arabia, but more than 4.5 million in the US. But again, here an interesting dimension is that today they are moving from the margins of society to becoming mainstreamed in US society and politics. Historically, the US has been built through immigration. And historically, there is an experience of different communities coming to the US, being on the margins for some time, and they becoming mainstream. For example, when the Irish migrated to the US, for a long time, they were on margins of society. Now they are very much a part of the mainstream. The present president in the US, President Biden, is an Irish American, John F. Kennedy, Irish American. Similarly, the Greeks, when they came, or the Jewish community when they came to the US, were initially on the margins and later they became mainstreamed. And so the Indian origin community, when they came, initially, again, like all immigrant communities, on the margins. But if you look at the situation today, the vice president of the US is a person of Indian origin. The leading person, cabinet rank person responsible for science and technology policy of the US government located in the White House, Dr. Arti Prabhakar, is a person of Indian origin. The person who heads the National Science Foundation, which funds all research in the US, Dr. Panchnathan, person of Indian origin. The speechwriter of the US President, Vinay Reddy, is a person of Indian origin. The person who is overall responsible for personnel policy of the US government through the White House, Gautam Raghavan, is a person of Indian origin. So Indian origin persons today occupy key positions in the administration. And if you look at the business sector, you know, the CEOs of Microsoft, Google, Adobe, IBM, Starbucks, some of the leading US companies, the CEOs are persons of Indian origin. In fact, there was one estimate that 25 Indian CEOs of the leading companies that they head, they control a market capitalization of $25 trillion. Now that's 8 times India's GDP. So you can see the power that they are wielding in the US system. And when I was posted in the US, I used to go very often to California, to the Silicon Valley. And I could see that Indian origin tech entrepreneurs, Indian origin tech workers, Indian origin CEOs were not on the margins, but an integral part of US global leadership in innovation, including in digital technologies. So that was the kind of impact that they were having on US society. There are more than 110,000 Indian origin doctors in the US. Now, of course, we can say that it's sad that they have gone away from India. They should be serving communities in India. But that aside, 1 out of 7 patients in the US today is seen by an Indian origin doctor. And normally when I'm speaking in class, I ask my students to guess the next figure that I'm mentioning. But still, you know, 40% of all hotel rooms in the United States are owned and managed by Indian Americans. And the figure is 60% if you look at the medium and lower segment hotels, leaving out the luxury class. So the Indian origin community today is deeply integrated in US society, politics, administration, and historically till 2014, we had only 3 Indian Americans elected to US Congress. Today, at any point of time, there are 5 or 6 Indian Americans in US Congress. And some of them, Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, Raja Krishnamurthy, are playing leading roles in US Congress institutional structures, influencing the direction of policy. So they have become a very important participants in US political system. And that, of course, there will be challenges, but it's also an opportunity that India can tap into as it looks at strengthening India-US relations in a way that works for it. And another area where there's a deep linkage is that we have today more than 200,000 Indian students, not Indian origin students, not students whose parents are in the US, but Indian students whose parents and families are in India. 200,000 Indian students in US universities. Now, at one level, it's an outflow because for them, we are paying $6 billion just as tuition fees. And there's an additional expenditure on the cost of stay, people going back and forth. But through their study in the US, they are able to build networks, they are able to get deeper understanding of the US economy, business, politics. And whether they stay on in the US or come back to India, they're then able to develop based on the experience and networks to enhance the economic opportunity between India and the US. So that's another dimension that is leading to deepening of the partnership. Now, as Dr. Abhay Kumar mentioned, it is not a relationship that has been positive always. It has gone through different phases. And when I study the India-US relationship deeply, I find that 4 factors have impacted on this relationship. So if you just keep these factors in mind, you can explain the dimension of the relationship at any point of time and the relative weight of these 4 factors and how they influence each other. So the first factor that has impacted on India-US relations is what is US global priority at that point of time? How do they define that? This is their main objective. Within the framework of their global priority, what is the role that they see for Pakistan? Because that is going to impact on us. Third, within the framework of their global priority, what is the role they see for China? Because that is going to impact on us. And finally, what is the strength in the bilateral relationship? Trade, investment, diaspora, and other dimensions, because that will influence the relationship. So if you factor in these 4 dimensions, you can explain the relationship at any point of time. So within this framework, there was a phase, let's say, first between 1947, when we became independent, till 1990, when there were ups and downs, but broadly we had a difficult relationship with the US. And the reason for that was that at that time, it was a bipolar world, essentially led by US on one side, Soviet Union on the other, and they were in very deep competition and conflict with each other. Now, as part of that strategy, the United States decided to build military alliances to contain the Soviet Union. And so they encouraged countries to join those military alliances. And the US message was that if you are not with us, it means you are against us. And India had just become independent in 1947. Having become independent at that time, we did not want to subjugate our decision-making to alliances controlled by other people. And so as a result of that, the Indian leadership, led by then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, opted to stay out of military alliances, and then eventually the policy and institutional structure of non-alignment and the non-aligned movement, so that the smaller, newly independent countries could stay away from military alliances and maintain the independence and autonomy of their decision-making. Now, when this was happening, Pakistan saw an opportunity. They felt that if India is going to stay away from military alliances, then Pakistan, which is smaller, which is weaker, will gain against India and get military supplies by joining a US-led military alliance structure. So became part of the US-led military alliance in West Asia, first the Baghdad Pact, then the Central Treaty Organization, became a part of the US-led military alliance in Southeast Asia, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which was the US effort to contain China. And as a result of that, Pakistan got military supplies from the US. Pakistan also got political support from the US at the United Nations, because as you know, in 1948, India moved the UN against Pakistan on the issue of Jammu and Kashmir, because Pakistani troops had come into Jammu and Kashmir in 1947 after Kashmir had acceded to India. And India's position was that aggression had happened, and this newly created international structure, post-Second World War international structure, which said that its objective was to maintain peace and security, would take the position based on facts and principles. And so India moved the UN. Initially, the US supported India at the United Nations. US took the position that this is a post-Second World War world. It must be based on principles. Aggression has happened. Aggression is not acceptable. And then the declassified archives show that the British went and lobbied the US. And the British argument was that India is too big. It is too independent-minded. See what they are doing to us. We become independent. They're trying to decolonize the rest of the world. Pakistan is much smaller. It will remain dependent on us. And we will be able to manipulate decision-making in Pakistan. And it will give us military bases. Therefore, let us support Pakistan on the J&K issue at the United Nations. As a result of that, the US changes its position, becomes more supportive of Pakistan politically at the UN. And the Soviet Union moves into that breach and starts supporting India at the United Nations and exercising veto when required in favor of India. So that leads to strengthening of the India-Soviet relations, complicates the India-US relationship. And although despite this complication from the political perspective, the US remained supportive of India on the economic issues because they were sort of negative towards India because India stayed out of military alliances, but they still saw the voice of a democratic India as more useful for US interests than the voice of a communist China. So they felt that they should contribute in whatever way to economic development in India so that India is seen as successful, a democratic India is seen as successful in comparison to a communist China. So the US worked with India in the Green Revolution that happened in India in the second half of the 1960s. You may recall that before that, India was deficient in food grains. We had repeated famines. But after the Green Revolution, we have now become self-sufficient in food grains. We have sufficient stocks, and we are now exporting food grains. So that was an important US partnership in the effort that was made in India. Similarly, in 1962, when we had the conflict with China, although by then we had a very good relationship with the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union held back a little because they had broadly an alliance arrangement with communist China. But the United States at that time, although we had a difficult relationship with them and we were not part of the military alliance structure, stepped forward to provide military assistance to India. And the largest military assistance we got in '62 was from the US. And as the declassified archives show, that the Indian Prime Minister wrote to the US President, asking for aircraft to be supplied, and not just aircraft, but also US pilots to come and fly those aircraft, which was a difficult situation. Fortunately, it was not eventually needed because the Chinese declared ceasefire and withdrew a certain distance from the point of where the conflict was happening at that time. So those were the ups and downs in the India-US relationship till 1990. Now in 1990, the Soviet Union collapsed. It dissolved and it split up into 15 different countries. So a major political and defense supporter of India suddenly got weakened. And it was a unipolar world structure now, dominated essentially by the United States. And at that time, the United States tried to bring it new norms in international relations to suit its own interests, seeing its domination of the global system, and many of which worked against India's interests. So, for example, India had not joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1967 because we argued that it was discriminatory. It allowed nuclear weapons to be held by only 5 countries: US, Soviet Union, China, France, and the UK. We had a difficult relationship with China, which was now a recognized nuclear weapon power. So it was discriminatory, and India would not join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But using its new domination of the global system in 1995, The United States has a resolution passed through the arrangements where the NPT was discussed for an indefinite extension of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that it is now valid forever. And therefore, no country other than the 5 who are recognized would be recognized as nuclear weapon powers. That was clearly against India's interests. Similarly, in 1996, they pushed through the UN system something called the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, saying that no further nuclear weapon tests should take place. Now, if India had to develop itself as a capable or a nuclear weapon power that would be have an impact on the international system, it would need to do some tests. And India said that we would not be able to join this treaty. So within that, they brought in a particular article which has never been done in normal treaties, that unless certain number of countries that were mentioned, including India, join the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, it would not become valid. So as a way of pressurizing India. And of course, India completely rejected that. So during that unipolar phase in international affairs, the US was trying to universalize certain norms and principles which suited its interests and did not quite factor in India's concerns. So India used that moment in 1998 to carry out a series of nuclear weapon tests. So we did 5 tests in May 1998, declaring ourselves now a nuclear weapon power. Of course, the others will not formally recognize India as a nuclear weapon power, but they accept the reality that this is where the situation is. Now, once we showed our capability and declared ourselves a nuclear weapon power, I think the US assessed that this was now the time to build a different relationship with India. And so this, after first criticizing India, imposing sanctions against India, later they entered into a very deep discussions with India about what kind of a relationship we can build between us, what are your security and strategic concerns, where can there be a convergence, where are the areas that we can work together. And starting from that, from 2000, and again, Dr. Abhay Kumar had referred to the visit of President Clinton to India. Starting from that visit, the relationship has now changed step by step in an accelerated upward trajectory. President Clinton visited India in 2000. Before that, the visit to India of US President Carter was in 1978, 22 years earlier, showing that, the fact that there was a lot of distance in the relationship. But after President Clinton, a Democratic president, came a Republican George Bush. And he said to his administration that I want to deepen the partnership with India. Find ways to deepen the partnership with India. So his administration did a very deep dive analysis as to what are the ways in which the relationship with India can be deepened. And they came to the conclusion that if we want to deepen the partnership with India, the first thing we need to do is to do a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with India, allowing for cooperation in civilian nuclear power. Because without that, there were a lot of US restrictions on technology transfers to India, on nuclear technologies, on space technologies, defense technologies. And unless you allow high-level technology partnership, you cannot really deepen a relationship. So to enable a high-level technology partnership, US had to remove nuclear and space technology related restrictions on India. So that started the process. In 2008, US did a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with India. Till 2008, India had hardly bought any defense supplies from the US. Now, India has contracted to buy more than $23 billion worth of defense supplies from the US. And not only are we buying from the US, we are now talking more and more of a defense technology partnership. And the latest example is the transfer of US authorization of transfer for GE jet engine technology. And jet engine technology is something that very few countries in the world have. And as the US says, this is the highest level technology transfer for jet engines that they have authorized for any other country. So after George Bush, we had a Democratic President Obama. And President Obama was the first US president to visit India twice in his tenure, 2010, 2015. In 2010, during his visit, he declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council. So far, US had not done that. In 2015, when he came as chief guest on our Republic Day. Now, that was the first time that the US president had come as a chief guest on India's Republic Day, which is surprising. You know, they say they are the world's oldest democracy. We are the largest democracy. 26th January is the day when we gave to ourselves a democratic constitution. So that was something, you know, one would expect the US to recognize and honor. But again, because of the difficulties in the relationship. So he came in 2015. In 2016, the US declared India as a major defense partner, again authorizing higher level defense related technologies to India. After a democratic, so we had a Democratic Clinton, Republican George Bush, Democratic Obama, then we had a Republican Trump. And President Trump, although he took some measures against India on tariff related issues, placed India on what was called STA1, Strategic Trade Authorization Level 1, for highest level technology releases on a par with the NATO allies and partners of the US. So he does that. And then after President Trump, we have President Biden, a Democrat. And in his tenure, India and the US in January this year launched a new initiative for a partnership in critical and emerging technologies. In artificial intelligence, quantum, cyber, 6G, biotech, semiconductors, space, and defense. And the message is, and this was launched by the two national security advisors, the message is that from the national security perspective, we believe that India and the US should partner in highest levels of technologies. Now, that's a very different message compared to what we saw in the earlier phase of the relationship. Very different message from what we see in terms of how the US is projecting related to China, because they are restricting Chinese access to technologies in the US. And here the message is we want to do more and more. So once again, if we go back to the four factors that I mentioned for you, why is the US now much more open to a deeper partnership with India? So what is the US global priority at the moment? And they have now said repeatedly that while they see Russia as an immediate challenge in Europe, they see China as their main economic, technological, and military challenge in the global context. They see China as the only country with the intent and capability to replace the US in the international system, and they must respond to that challenge. So they are trying to build partnerships, alliances all across the world, in Europe, in Atlantic, in what is now called the Indo-Pacific, with India to deal with the challenge from China. And the US assessment is that even if India is not overtly anti-China, a strong India in itself will be a natural deterrent to China, a natural constraint on the kind of unilateral policies that China may want to adopt. So that's one reason to build the relationship with India. Now, if you look at Pakistan, the salience for Pakistan in the US foreign policy at the moment has come down. Because there was a relevance that Pakistan had since 2000, after 9/11 attacks, 2001, because the US needed Pakistan to be able to access Afghanistan. Today, the US has pulled out of Afghanistan. So they don't need Pakistan the same. On US-China issues, they see Pakistan is completely aligned with China and will never be supportive of the US in the context of China. So the salience of Pakistan has come down. And then they see more and more opportunities in the economic and technology relationship with India. We spoke about the diaspora presence. But large number of US companies employ certain number of people in India doing cutting-edge R&D and technology development work. You know, Pratt and Whitney, for example, which has jet engine technology, and India doesn't have jet engine technology, but Pratt and Whitney employs 5,000 people in Bengaluru, doing cutting-edge R&D and technology work on jet engines. Of course, the IP is owned by the US company, but they need the tech human capital of India. Honeywell employs 10,000 people in India. General Electric employs 8,000 people in India. So they have assessed that when they are dealing with the challenge from China, 1.4 billion people, they need a partnership with the 1.4 billion people in India to scale up in manpower terms to deal with this challenge. So that becomes another factor, aside from the various areas of strengthened dimensions of the bilateral relationship. So going forward, given what I have described for you, given the major global contestation between US, Russia, and China, given the US perception of China as its main global adversary, given the US perception of economic and technology opportunities and gains from partnership with India, going ahead, at least for some time, one can assess that in this area of multipolarity, US will remain heavily invested in the India relationship. And it is for us to decide how we want to seize this opportunity. So let me stop here, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such an illustrative insight. So we will open the floor for questions. So first we will have questions from the students, and then if any faculty also has any question or query, so we take. So it's open for students. So I think Brainy has the first question. So, sir, what will you prefer? We should take all the questions in one go, or you will answer?
Maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions and then decide.
Thanks. Brainy, come.
Hello, sir. Good morning. My question is, how did Modi diplomacy has improved the India and US ties in the present context?
Next person. Palak has another question.
Hello, sir. Wishing you a very good morning, sir. First of all, I would like to thank. Now, my question to you, sir, is that the transforming defense innovation, that is Indus X, launches in Washington, D.C., accelerating India-US collaboration. Then, according to you, how will it affect the financial status of both the countries? Whether will it have positive outcomes or negative outcomes? Thank you, sir.
Khushi Surana.
Good afternoon, sir. My question to you would be that my question has basically 2 parts. That in an increasingly multipolar world, is India able to maintain its strategic neutrality in this increasingly multipolar world? And my second part of the question to you would be that I was following one of your recent interviews, and you said that it is important. There's this important aspect that has been ignored, that the US gets value from Indian partnership. So how vital for US it is to smoothen trade relationships with India?
Can we take few more questions and then you can respond?
Yeah, so let me respond to these and then we can take more if you could. First, on the first question, I wanted to mention to you that several Indian prime ministers now have put in a lot of effort and their personal imprint on improving the India-US relationship. Dr. Abhay Kumar had referred to the time President Reagan, Rajiv Gandhi, And then Prime Minister Vajpayee, post unipolar phase, post our nuclear tests, when the US had criticized India heavily and led sanctions against India, at that time, he put in a lot of effort to try and change around the relationship. And it was the initial effort made by his designated envoy, Mr. Jaswant Singh from the Indian side and Mr. Stroke Talbot from the US side, designated by Bill Clinton. And their deep conversations, 14 meetings spread over 18 months, 10 different countries, that started the process of transforming the relationship, leading to the Clinton visit in 2000. Prime Minister Vajpayee described India and US as natural allies. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh staked the survival of his government on getting the civil nuclear agreement through the Indian Parliament. Because the left parties were opposed to this agreement. Their argument was that India would become too dependent on the US, subservient to the US. And there was, it has not been, it has been disproved by subsequent events, but that was their position. And they moved a no confidence motion against the government. And they were till then a partner in the government. So he staked the survival of his government to get the civil nuclear agreement through. Similarly, Prime Minister Modi has also taken steps to advance the India-US relationship in different areas. So I think each Prime Minister has made some impact on this. The second question on Indus-X, I know this is an effort that was started on 21st June this year, because as I mentioned to you, earlier India was only buying defense equipment from the US, but now we have started a conversation related to partnership in defense technology. So the Indus-X was an attempt to bring defense companies in both the US and India together in a framework for discussion on how could they build partnerships for technology collaboration, for supply chain partnerships. So again, many US companies now have begun the process of sourcing components from India for their defense supplies that they are doing. Lockheed and Boeing have built partnerships with Tata, with several other companies. So in fact, some months ago, when our Raksha Mantri was speaking at an event, he said that 35% of our defense exports in the last 5 years have gone through the value chain of US companies. So there is an attempt to build a supply chain relationship. There is an attempt to do technology partnership. And for that, clearly, you need the companies on both sides to talk more to each other and look for opportunities. So that's what is being done, and that's the role that Indus-X is playing. Similarly, in terms of your question on whether India has been able to maintain its strategic autonomy, and the position that India has taken on the Russia-Ukraine conflict is a clear indicator. India has not gone along with the US on Ukraine. India has not condemned Russia. India has not voted against Russia at the United Nations. At the same time, India has not supported Russia either. India has expressed support for sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries, which is an indirect sort of distancing from the Russian position on Ukraine. India has called for diplomacy to end the conflict. And the Indian Prime Minister, when he was speaking to President Putin last year, said that this is not an era of war, something that the rest of the world also noticed. And from the US side, although I don't think they're necessarily very happy that India has not gone along with them and has maintained its own position, the US Secretary of State has said on a number of occasions that we understand India's compulsions related to Russia, because the India-Russia relationship developed at the time when the US was not willing to be that kind of a partner. And then he added, of course, but today we are willing to be that kind of a partner, and let's continue to consolidate the relationship. And then the US National Security Advisor said a couple of occasions that with India, we are playing the long game. So whatever be their positioning, as far as India is concerned, it made an assessment of the situation, keeping its own interests in mind, the importance of the relationship with Russia, and also, of course, US and others. and took a position, which was an Indian position, not a US position or a Russian position. And on your question about my comment about US sees value in the India partnership, and I mentioned some of it there, that there is the trade aspect, there's the technology partnership aspect. Indians are playing a very important role in US global leadership in innovation, working in the US, leading many of the technology companies. And US companies are getting cutting-edge R&D and technology development work being done in India through their subsidiaries, which of course then they integrate of the overall system. So, so those are there, and of course there's the whole assessment that a strong India in its own right will be a deterrent to China's unilateralist choices. So from that perspective, US certainly sees value from the India partnership. Not only is the fact that for India there's a value in the US partnership, and this dimension also needs to be noticed more and more. Thank you.
Sir, can we take a budget?
Sorry?
Budget questions more.
Yeah, we can take another round of questions.
So now we have a question from Punark.
Good afternoon, sir. So as you mentioned in your seminar that we are 2 lakh students in USA studying and we are paying $6 billion in their tuition. Simultaneously, in the new education policy in 2020, it's been mentioned that we try to have few institutions, the top 500 institutions, 100 institutions, then later upgrade to 500 to open their foreign branch campuses in India. It will also help a lot of Indian students as the SAT fees is very high, and we also apply for H1 visas or F1 visas. That even the application for visas is also high. So how we can compel America to like work on the open institutions in India because they're not showing any interest in 3 years since 2020.
Next question is from Rev.
Very warm greetings to you, sir. My question to you is that does the Northern world consider New Delhi and India a potential candidate for the permanent membership in United Nations Security? Thank you.
Does who consider?
The Northern world.
Northern world.
Yes.
Next is Tejasvi.
Warm greetings to you, sir. My question to you is, how has the war in Ukraine has changes the US and India relations?
Sorry?
How has the war in Ukraine has changed the US and India relations?
Aman.
Good morning, sir. My question is, why is US taking India as an important ally?
One more question, sir, from Meenakshi.
Good afternoon, sir. My question is, can the Indo-US relationship serve as a stabilizing force in a world characterized by growing multipolarity and geopolitical tensions? Thank you, sir.
I think, sir, you can answer all these questions, then we will.
Okay, thank you. So I'll answer these questions and maybe we can wind up after that. First, on this question on the NEP and foreign branches not yet coming up, and why can't we compel the US? So, not even the US government can compel the universities. In the US, the universities have a lot of autonomy. They have a lot of funding of their own. And ultimately, it is the university leadership in each case which decides the strategy for that university. And so they have to finally find it worthwhile for them financially and otherwise to look at setting up a branch in India rather than attract Indian students to their main campus. And so I think those conversations need to continue. There's much more, I think, work to be done in this area. On the second question about where is the Northern world on UNSC permanent membership. So, the United States today has declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council. If you look at the P5, France and UK have also declared support for India's permanent membership of UN Security Council. Russia has indicated broadly that it will not come in India's way. So among the P5, the only country that is not supportive is China. And that, of course, is a complication because eventually for changing the structure of the UN Security Council in terms of the UN Charter, every P5 member must agree. So that's one block that you have. Then going beyond that, you need 2/3 vote in the General Assembly for changing the structure. And so about 130 countries. And there, all kinds of opposition is building to particular candidatures. For example, Italy is opposed to Germany becoming a permanent member. South Korea and China are opposed to Japan becoming a permanent member. Argentina and Mexico are opposed to Brazil becoming a permanent member. Pakistan is, of course, completely opposed to India becoming a permanent member. So many of these smaller countries who don't see any gain for themselves from any change in the structure of the Security Council, they have come together to try and stall progress. So as far as India's own candidature is concerned, I don't think there is really any opposition in what you refer to as the northern world. The opposition, if any, is elsewhere. But there is a broader opposition to overall restructuring of the Security Council, mainly for countries who see no gain to themselves, and therefore why should they support that? So again, it's a conversation that needs to continue. On the Ukraine conflict, I think there was a worry initially that whether the obviously independent position we will take, the clear interest that we have related to Russia, as I mentioned right in the beginning, we need to sustain our relationship with Russia. If that would complicate US-India relations. But I think the US leadership, the US administration has handled it reasonably well. They have said that they understand India's compulsions related to this. And so with that, I think we've managed the difference on this crisis well. Even, for example, on the import of energy, we significantly increased our imports of energy from Russia. When the US was trying to, at one stage, limit Russia's capacity to export energy. But I think India explained clearly that it needed energy for its population. And India was initially getting from the Gulf. But large number of European countries who stopped buying from Russia then started buying from the Gulf countries. So India had to source from elsewhere. And at the same time, the US imposed a price cap on export of Russian oil. And I think most of the oil from Russia that India imported was within that price cap. So India didn't fall foul of that requirement. So I think both countries have worked to handle this. The question on why does US value India as an important ally? US does not look at India as an ally. We clearly say that we don't want to be any country's ally. We don't look at alliances. We are looking at strategic partnerships where we work together, where there is convergence of interests, but we have the capacity to maintain the autonomy of our decision making. And so they value the India relationship because of India's growing economic strength, technology strength, defense strength, and they see advantage to themselves in this partnership. So given that, I do believe that a strengthening India-US relationship will clearly be a stabilizing force globally, but of course in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, because that's where China along our LAC, China in the East China Sea, South China Sea, is taking unilateral positions, declaring areas as sovereign, militarizing some islands and features which are in violation of international law, which are in violation of the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas. So from that perspective, I think the India-US relationship will certainly be a stabilizing force. So I do believe I have responded to the questions that were put to me. So thank you.
Sir, can we spare 5 more minutes because just raising hands. So next question is from Pooja.
Good afternoon, sir. So my question is, what role does India play in Indo-Pacific region, and how does US view this role of India?
Palak.
Sir, my question to you is that India being a democratic country is the only basis of India-US relationship. Thank you.
Next is Anwar.
Good morning, sir. My question is, how has Biden administration approach to India differed from previous administrations?
I think that should be the last question. If any faculty has anything, then you will ask. So you can reply.
Any other questions, or should I respond?
Sorry, sir.
Are there any other questions, or that's it?
Not as such. So you reply,
Okay.
then I will
All right.
request faculty if anybody has.
So I think there was a question whether democracy is the only basis for the India-US relationship. So, you know, any relationship, particularly as the US defines a relationship, is influenced by two factors: interests and values. So ultimately, and when there is a conflict between interests and values, then interests prevail. So, for example, if you look at the US relationship with Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia is not a democracy, but it's a very strong relationship that the US has with Saudi Arabia because of energy security and other dimensions. So with India, for a long time, when there was not sufficient convergence of interest, not sufficient bilateral linkage in trade and investment, the fact that India was a democratic country was an important dimension in providing support to the relationship. Today, when there is huge convergence of interests, then that is bringing the two countries closer together. And in that framework, the aspect that India is democratic adds further value and support for India in the US system, and that's how it plays out. Now, in terms of how does the US see India's role in the Indo-Pacific? So as you know, this term Indo-Pacific is of relatively recent origin. Earlier, people used to refer to the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Asia Pacific. But the term Indo-Pacific, although there were some references here and there, in 2007, the Japanese Prime Minister speaking in the Indian Parliament spoke about the confluence of the two seas, the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, how strategically that there is a convergence in these areas and the countries of the region have to work together. But it was only in the Trump administration that they started using the term Indo-Pacific. And they said that the area of interest in the Indo-Pacific, as far as the US is from the west coast of India to the east coast of the United States, or as was otherwise described, from Bollywood to Hollywood. And so this is the area that they were looking at. And that was a signal that now they're attaching more value to the India relationship because they see the partnership with India, hence the term Indo-Pacific, as critical for US strategies in the broader Pacific region. And in fact, the US Pacific Command, based in Hawaii, which is the US regional command that looks at US security and military interests from the west coast of India till the west coast of the United States, was earlier called PACOM, the Pacific Command. And it was renamed to Indo-PACOM, the Indo-Pacific Command, again as a signal that sees value in the India partnership in this part of the world. So I think the US certainly values very much today the India relationship in terms of handling its challenges in the Indo-Pacific region. Of course, one of the responses from India was, okay, this is one area, but what about the Indian Ocean? I mean, interests of India go west of the west coast of India. We have interests in the Gulf, we have interests in Africa, and that cannot be ignored in terms of how India's interests are factored into any relationship. So the US now has declared and has entered into discussions with India, also related to the Indian Ocean. The Indian Navy also talks to the US CENTCOM, the Central Command, which broadly looks at the Gulf and the Northern Indian Ocean region, talks to AFRICOM, the Africa Command, which looks to Africa and the southern part of the Indian Ocean. So those conversations are also going on, and the US is at the moment certainly showing the willingness to understand and accommodate and work with India's interests also in this broader region. And on this question on how the Biden administration has differed from the others. So, as I described, each administration is building on the relationship. And with each administration since Clinton, it has deepened. So Clinton starts the process by post-1998 having a deep conversation with India to see if the relationship can be structured in a way where there's convergence of interests, visits India in the last year of his term, 2000, and sends a different message on the relationship. George Bush does the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement in the face of tremendous opposition in his own administration. At many times, the relationship stalled, and ultimately Bush had to step in and say, I want this done. I want this deal done. Find a way to do it. And pushed his administration. Otherwise, the deal would not have come through. And the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Agreement completely opens up pathways to technology partnerships. Obama comes in, sustains that approach, declares India a major defense partner, declares support for permanent membership of UN Security Council, visits India twice. After that, Trump comes in, places India on STA-1 authorization. He joins the Indian Prime Minister in September 2019 in Houston for a rally of 50,000 Indian Americans, which was there to welcome the Indian Prime Minister. Very unusual for a US president to go to a rally honoring a visiting foreign leader. And not only does he go there, he speaks there, it stays right through the event. And at the end of the event, goes around the stadium along with the Indian Prime Minister. So particular messaging there. And then, of course, he came to India in 2020. And then in comes Biden. And if you go back and look at some of Biden's earlier comments, in 2006, when he was not even vice president, he was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. And a comment he had said that his dream was that by 2020, the strongest partnership in the world would be the India-US partnership. And of course, in 2021, he became president. He has taken that further. He has, for example, the meetings of the Quad, India, US, Japan, and Australia, were earlier meeting at mid-level officials in the Trump administration at foreign minister level. And Biden has increased it now to summit level meetings. So these four countries, Japan, Australia, India, and the US, now have met 3 or 4 times at the summit level to discuss, increase in cooperation, look at the challenges in the broader Indo-Pacific region. And then his government has launched this new initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which if we are able to take it forward successfully, will build a new relationship between India and the US for the coming period. And through the INDUS-X that was referred to, exploring deepening defense technology partnership. So I would say that Biden is building on the trajectory that was set by his predecessor since Clinton, and he's taking it further. So that would be the best way to describe it. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. I think we must stop now. Sir, you were speaking since last 70 minutes without a sip of water. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. I know you have to spare this time, this date out of a very busy travel plan. I know that. Thank you so much, sir. We are obliged to you. And thanks also to our director for encouraging, allowing us. Also, thanks due to Dean as well for his positive words and encouragement. A special mention to all my colleagues, not only to be physically present here, but for all encouragement. A special mention to Dr. Neha Bharti for being there in all the processes everywhere. Thanks also due to Mahavir Singh with our office in charge, IT cell of the MIT University, particularly Sarvesh Ji and Bantiji. And thanks to all dear students who is there their time and be there and asking very intelligent questions. So thank you so much, sir. And our next webinar in this series is scheduled in October sometime. So thanks all and thank you so much, sir. We will catch up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the interaction. Best wishes to all of you.